Today we will be talking about how a cellular response may be activated. First up is the G protein receptor system. Here you see the cell membrane, which consists of many signal receptors. The G protein receptor binds to the chemical messengers, which are signaling molecules or ligands. Once they bind, the signal receptor is activated and changes shape. That concludes the reception step of the pathway. Now the transduction step starts. The cytoplasmic site of the G protein receptor binds to an inactive G protein. The GDP, which is attached to the inactive G protein, becomes GTP when activated. The activated G protein then diffuses along the membrane to an inactive enzyme, which is adenylyl cyclase. The adenylyl cyclase is now activated and helps catalyze the conversion of ATP to CAMP, which is a secondary messenger. The CAMP then activates the protein kinase. The protein kinase then phosphorylates additional proteins. Once the additional proteins are activated, the cell is to the final step of the pathway, which is the response. In this pathway, the response is a release of calcium ions from the ER. And that concludes the G protein receptor system.
The signaling molecule or the ligand attaches to the receptor site. The two polypeptides then come together, which is called a dimer. The tyrosine regions act as kinases. They take phosphates off of ATP and attach them to the tyrosines. Relay proteins then attach to the phosphates and change shape, which then leads to its own signal transduction pathway. Each relay protein that attaches produces its own different cellular response.
Parkinson's disease is a chronic and progressive movement disorder that affects the central nervous system. It affects structures like the basal ganglia, which is involved in the coordination of movement. Damage in nerve cells yield a drop in dopamine levels. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that is responsible for transmitting signals between neurons of the brain. It is important in initiating and starting movement. A drop in these levels is what causes symptoms of Parkinson's disease. Symptoms include shaking, stiffness, difficulty walking, difficulty speaking, anxiety, and restless sleep. The best method of treatment for this disease is medication and self-care. Some might consider taking dopamine promoter drugs, antidepressants, and even anti-tremors. Self-care includes physical exercise and physical therapy. Here is how the system of a healthy patient would work. In a normal pathway, dopamine reaches the D1 and D2 receptors of the postsynaptic neuron. It goes through a normal G protein pathway where the signal carried by the dopamine activates a G protein coupled receptor, which activates a G protein and then later an enzyme. This is what causes a cellular response. That very cellular response is the electrical message that successfully passes through the neuron, and this in turn allows muscle movement. Here is what the scenario would look like in a patient with Parkinson's disease. The process is pretty much the same. In a patient with Parkinson's disease, however, there is less dopamine as well as less receptors to receive those very signals, which results in fewer cellular responses. This is why muscle movement is delayed. Here is a condensed overview of what we've been over. In a healthy patient, there will be greater levels of dopamine as well as receptors. In a patient with Parkinson's disease, however, there will be less dopamine and less receptors.